And so we used our patient capital to help him go through the prototype stage and build his company. And when we saw that this was actually viable, we used the patient capital again to create a for-profit company that would focus on distribution and scale. And then we started looking at exporting to Egypt, and to East Africa, and even to Latin America. But Pakistan was a different animal because the relations between India and Pakistan are really difficult. So we used patient capital again to set up another for-profit company, half owned by Acumen, half owned by Dr. Sonu Kangarani, who is a Pakistani social entrepreneur from the Thar Desert. He's from the lowest caste of Hinduism, the Dalit, and yet he believes that you can use tools of business to reach even those people who have been too often excluded, and it's been really excited to see that go. So it's about patient capital going into areas that have been underserved, too often ignored, building commercial solutions from the perspective of the poor, and then scaling it over time. I know a number of you are really interested in how you grow or scale, and I just want to give just a few examples of the 40 that Acumen Fund has done. I talked about this last time I was in Japan, and I say it again only because, one, it's been one of our best partnerships with a Japanese company, Sumitomo Chemical Company. But two, we've seen unbelievable growth. This is a technology that was developed by Sumitomo here in Japan to build a long-lasting insecticide-impregnated malaria bed net that would protect people for 5 years. And when they first started, Sumitomo, it was only developed for, it was only manufactured in Vietnam and China. But then the company got this idea, why not let African entrepreneurs solve African problems? And so Acumen came together with Sumitomo, with UNICEF, with Exxon, with the Global Fund to identify an African entrepreneur in Arusha, Tanzania, who would take big risks. No banks would finance them. We used our patient capital to make a loan, $350,000 in 2002. And my dream was that we would see 105 jobs and 150,000 nets per year manufactured. And today that company has created 7,000 jobs. It's the second largest company in the country, producing 20 million bed nets, protecting 40 million Africans every year. Huge success story for Africa, huge success story for how business can really make change. Water Health International. 2003, there was no water distribution that sold to the low-income individual in rural India, for good reason. Really difficult roads. The low-income people felt water came from God, and God would decide whether the water was clean or not, whether you would be healthy or not. Politicians said water is free, and so there was no incentive to pay. And so Tralanzati, the entrepreneur, needed a long time to experiment and to fail and to understand again how he could offer a product to the low-income person that she would buy, and often it's the woman who make these decisions. And Acumen Fund worked with Water Health International not only to provide the capital, but to provide management assistance, helping them actually completely redesign the plant because the first plant they had was way too complex. And over time, we realized that we had to work with the banks. We could use our patient capital to put up a first loss guarantee to the commercial bank, ICICI Bank, so that they would be able to lend for the first time to markets that they had never entered before, so that philanthropy and the markets could play a part. And suddenly we released $10 million in capital, and part of the million that we just got back was $650,000 when ICICI released that guarantee because they had seen that there was real viability in the rural markets. And as this company grew, and now there are 400,000 customers across 300 villages, the government of Andhra Pradesh, which is a 65 million strong state in India, said, now we have a model. Now we can partner to take this to scale. And so over the next 2 to 5 years, we're going to see 1 million people have access to water that wouldn't have had it before, because a social entrepreneur had the guts, if you will, to build a company that saw the poor as customers and build it from their perspective. There's lots of issues with this that we can talk about, in that they're having to close down some of the plants that don't work. And so then we have ethical considerations about how we don't leave those people behind as they scale. And I know this is something that Dr. Watanabe is interested in. And then finally, I want to talk about toilets. Kenya, 50% of the population has no access to sanitation. And so government did invest in the 1970s, but those public toilets were filthy, they were frightening, they were places of drugs and prostitution. And so David Kuria, one of the, an entrepreneur in Kenya, had a nonprofit model for building a public toilet system and came to Acumen Fund about 3-4 years ago. It didn't make sense to us as a nonprofit, but we worked with him to develop a for-profit business model where he would work with government but also gain access to private capital. And long story short, today there are about 22 of these toilets serving between 16 and 18,000 people per day. In 2009 alone, 4.3 million people use these toilets. And it's, again, such a model not only for the private initiative, but the government of Tanzania and the government of Uganda is looking at how they can take this model to scale in their own countries. What's so important about what Kuria has done is that he recognizes the power of dignity and that people want beauty, and they want safety, and they're willing to pay for it. And so inside these toilets, people are always cleaning. While it costs 5 cents, there's music pumped in. It's a very beautiful experience in contrast to what people had expected before.